friends. We are here in Romans chapter 5. So Romans chapter 5 has two sections. And the first section is essentially about us and our reconciliation with God through Christ, through faith. And the second one is basically talking about how we have a new nature through Christ also. So I'll talk about the first one first. Let's do the first things first. So it says something interesting in the previous chapter. It was saying, basically it was talking about Abraham, and through faith, Abraham was considered righteous through his faith, not his works. And this was the point, but I don't know how clear I made it yesterday. But Abraham had faith first, and then God gave him this covenant. And then he gave him circumcision. So the point that he's making is, to the Jewish people, he's saying circumcision is not the thing that makes you righteous. It's your faith that makes you righteous. It's the relationship. It's not the act that you do. And so in this chapter, he's saying, now on top of that, he was talking a lot in the last chapter about justification. Justification makes it so, if you had done something wrong, it would make it so that you are on neutral ground. It's not like you're on good standing. It's just that you're not in bad standing. But here he's saying, with Christ, now that you've been reconciled with Christ, now that you've been justified, you have access not only to justification, but grace. So grace is something completely different. I mean, it's not completely different, but grace is something different. Because it's not that we get what we deserve, which is something terrible. It's that we get not something neutral. We get something wonderful. We don't get hell like we deserve. And we don't get earth, which seems like kind of a neutral ground. We get heaven. So it goes on and talks about, in this chapter, the suffering. Now, I don't know exactly what suffering he's talking about, but we know that the Christians in Rome are about to go through a lot of suffering. And we know that Paul went through a lot of suffering. So he may be talking about his. By suffering, I mean like everywhere he went, he was essentially kind of kicked out, and he was stoned. He was, a lot of bad things happened to Paul. But we also know that in Rome, they at some point kicked out all of the Christians. And we know this because back in the book of Acts, it was talking about Priscilla and Aquila, and they were kicked out of Rome because they were Christians in Rome. And so Priscilla and Aquila, I guess, have gone back. But we know that the Christians in Rome were not, they weren't accepted very well. So he is saying, we rejoice in these sufferings. And he gives kind of a list. He says, because suffering creates endurance, and endurance creates hope. And the hope will not put you to shame. I think that's an interesting statement. The hope will not put you to shame, because I feel like when we talk about hope today, a lot of times we think of a person, at least the first thing I think of is a person that is hoping for something that's not going to happen. But he's saying, this is hope that will not put you to shame. And I think what he's trying to say here is that no, sorry, I just got kicked off campus by the police here. So I'm across the street now, so I'm legal. I'm allowed to be here filming this way, but I can't film the hospital anymore. Anyways, so the last thing I was talking about was hope. We have hope in heaven. And so when we go through suffering, we have hope in heaven. We don't need to, and it's actually a good thing for us, because if we hope too much in this earth, we will focus too much on it. So the suffering builds character in that way. The next thing next thing Paul talks about is how Jesus, he died for us, and he didn't do it while we were his friends. It says we did it while we were weak. He didn't do it because we were good people. He did it before we had any righteousness at all, because he's the one who gave us all the righteousness. But he says, if you probably wouldn't do this, is what Paul is saying. He's saying you wouldn't die. You wouldn't die for a bad person. And he said you definitely wouldn't, or you probably wouldn't die for a good person either. He says that if you really loved someone, it would be really difficult to even die for that person. But what Jesus did is he died for someone that was essentially his enemy. Before we were reconciled, he died for us. And so it's a really amazing thing. It's like God is our, he is our judge, but he's more than that. He is the person we've sinned against. It would be like going into court and you're seeing the judge on stage, and you're being tried for something. Let's say it's like you stole someone's car, but you stole the judge's car, and then the judge comes down and says, all right, I know you stole the car, and I know it was my car, but not only that, I'm going to let you off, and I'm going to give you the car that you wanted to steal. That's essentially what God's doing for us. It's truly amazing grace. And so the next section is basically talking about how we're given kind of like a new nature through Christ. And he's saying, we have this human nature that was given to us by Adam. And that nature is basically full of, sin, because Adam is the first person who sinned. So we've been given this sinful nature through Adam. But through Christ, we've been given this new nature. A nature that doesn't need to sin. A nature that leads to eternal life. This is kind of like what Jesus was talking about, in the book of John, where, he says that, you need to be born again. And he's not using exactly the same language, but it's the same concept. We need to be born again. We need to be born of this new nature that leads to life, that's not a nature of sin. And so that's what Paul is talking about here. It's interesting, there was a part in this chapter also where Paul is saying that the Jewish people, they believed that they could be saved through following the law, and they kept on building more and more laws. And he's saying, if you keep on building up more laws, you're not going to have more righteousness. You're just going to have more ways of breaking the law. It produces more sin because there's more ways you can go wrong if you produce more laws. And he says the only way out of this horrible trap that they have is to understand the truth that we're not saved by the law at all. We're saved by the grace. And the law is good because it shows the grace that we can receive all the more. Anyways, that's Romans chapter 5. Have a great day. Bye.